From our State House studio in Montgomery, I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. The legislature was back in action today as the session entered its final stretch. Lawmakers are expected to meet Wednesday, Thursday, and maybe Friday to have the session wrapped up by week's end. Let's start tonight with a bill that has become law. Governor Kay Ivey today signed Senate Bill 171, the Numeracy Act, into law. This bill aims to address the state's lagging math scores by targeting more resources to struggling schools, deploying math coaches to help teachers, and holding schools accountable for continued failure to improve. In signing it, Ivey said, quote, "This strategic, targeted, and wise investment in our children will provide necessary resources, will include high-quality instruction, and will keep our schools accountable. The Alabama Numeracy Act delivers on my commitment to place the same sense of urgency on math as we rightfully have on reading. Students will not only understand how to find an answer, but will have the mathematical reasoning needed for in-demand STEM jobs in Alabama." I'll talk with State Representative Terri Collins about implementation of this new law later in the show. On their way to the governor's desk tonight are two bills amending the Alabama Literacy Act. House Bill 200 makes technical changes to the reading law, including reducing the amount of paperwork teachers have to deal with. Senate Bill 220 delays the law's holdback provision by 2 years. As originally enacted, the law would have seen third-grade students who cannot read proficiently held back from being promoted to fourth grade so they could get caught up. This legislation would delay that retention until spring of 2024.
This is the very same bill that we passed in last session that will delay only the retention piece of the Literacy Act. The Literacy Act is in force, and we see that it's working, but this is the only piece that will be delayed, and the reason for that is just like all the other new normals that we're dealing with in our world right now, and it's because of COVID. Our children have not been in school for many, many months, or they've been virtually. So this will only delay the retention piece of the Literacy Act. The rest of the Literacy Act will go forward.
What this amendment does, I've heard one big criticism from my teachers back home, and it's how much paperwork's associated with the Literacy Act, and that's what this amendment does. Attempts to reduce the amount of reporting that teachers have to do in the classrooms and reduce that paperwork.
Also on its way to the governor's desk is a bill regulating telemedicine in the state. Alabama is one of only just a handful of states that don't already have telehealth regulations or standards, which some say could lead to telemarketing scams. Senate Bill 272 from Senator Dan Roberts attempts to apply the same standards of care for in-person visits into virtual visits. State Representative Paul Lee was on the House lead on this same bill.
Very rarely do you come to pass a bill when there's so many people that come together to work on something. This is where the provider, the payer, and the regulator have come together and worked out the telehealth bill. Right now, we've all benefited from telehealth over the pandemic. We either have employees that have, or have had family members that have. But at the moment, there's no platform whatsoever in the state of Alabama, nor any rules. It's kind of like the Wild Wild West. Many of you, I'm sure, have had the calls about your extended warranty and things of that nature. The last thing we want to happen is for people to start calling you to be, can we be your doctor?
Also receiving final passage tonight was legislation to increase the allowable tax credit for individuals who donate to private school scholarships through the Alabama Accountability Act. Senate Bill 261 by Senator Dan Roberts does not change the $30 million cap, but it expands the allowable credit from 50% of an individual's tax burden to 100%, capped at $100,000.
This is a bill that allows for additional tax credit, raises a threshold so that people can use more of their tax credits to provide the scholarship granting organizations under the Alabama Accountability Act. Right now, the budget sets aside $30 million for these scholarships. This doesn't change that. This would just allow people to use more of their tax dollars toward this, would not affect the budget at all.
There was also action in committee today, as lawmakers tried to line up their bills for last-minute consideration in the final days of the session. House Bill 312, known as the Divisive Concepts Bill, was in the Senate Governmental Affairs Committee today. It would prohibit the teaching of certain concepts related to race, sex, or religion that could lead students or employees to feel shamed or marginalized due to traits they were born with. The bill advanced along party lines.
I don't see of these 9 issues that are prohibited by this that stops anyone from talking about slavery and the slave trade, that stops anyone from talking about segregation, Jim Crow.
Because I can tell you there's not a person out there who wants the things that you have enumerated here. We don't want that taught in schools. We don't want that taught in schools. But what's driving the conversation is fear, and fear on both sides. So I would just respectfully ask that you would carry it over to give us a chance to work this thing out from a place of love.
And House Bill 322, the Transgender Bathroom Bill, was in the same committee. This bill would require K-12 students to use only bathrooms and locker rooms corresponding to the sex on their birth certificate. Speaking to the committee today was Vanessa Tate Finney, who has a 13-year-old trans son. She's been following this and other trans bills.
And so he does ask questions when I come home and wants to know what happened. And he is disheartened and disappointed and feels very much as though he's not being welcomed by a bunch of people that, to quote him, really don't know what they're doing. And so it's very difficult to have those kind of conversations with him.
And lawmakers are almost finished with the education budget. The House today voted to go to a conference committee on a supplemental budget bill to iron out a few differences between the two versions. A final version of the $8.2 billion budget is expected to be sent to the governor tomorrow. We'll be right back with tonight's guests.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
Next, I'm joined by State Representative Terri Collins from Decatur. Ms. Collins, thanks again for coming on Capitol Journal.
Good to be with you, Todd.
Well, you've been on the floor today. It's been a long day here in the House, but I want to talk to you about the Literacy Act. This is a law that you sponsored. There are changes coming, though. 2 bills that passed today. One was yours, dealing with some technical changes to the bill. Tell me what this does.
The technical changes, the people that have been working to implement the Literacy Act, those from the Literacy Task Force, those in the department, and some from the Grade Level Reading Committee, they had made some recommendations of some clarifications, things that were maybe being misunderstood in different parts of the state where you're hearing different things. Some of the good cause exemptions were changed a little bit. At one point, we were having to count, because of federal law, English language learners after 2 years. Well, the federal law gives us a waiver of 3 years now before they're expected to be able to be a part of our accountability. So we changed that and included that. The original bill was never meant to hold a child in 3rd grade back twice in the 3rd grade. So we just changed so we actually say that. We know that different groups, that when the bill was passed, we were setting up a grade level reading committee. We were setting up the task force. Well, now they're working well, they're working hard. We added some members of the task force because the job is so hard to make sure that we have enough people. But we also changed who the accountability went to depending on what the task was. So it was a lot of clarification, but it was some important clarifications.
I see. And I understand you also added an amendment to both of the bills, actually, that is aimed at cutting down on the paperwork that teachers have to deal with. That seems like a common complaint.
It does seem like a common complaint. And having the task force look into it and find out how we can minimize that. What can we do that's just a standard, something that would go out that would simplify it? How can we use even PowerSchool and some of the online systems that we have now to make some of that reporting just automatic? And so looking for ways to cut down on that paperwork so that teachers are actually able to teach more than they are to just follow up on paperwork.
Mm-hmm. And the second change to the Literacy Act was not your bill, it was Senator Smitherman's, and this delays that accountability provision, the holdback provision, by 2 years.
Correct.
I say it's not yours because you and the governor had agreed to 1 year.
Yes.
But it looks like 2 years is going to her desk. Do you think she's going to sign it?
I believe that she will. We had talked with her earlier in the year. We had the changes that were in my bill, and it had a 1 year delay change. Senator Smitherman felt very, very strongly at that point. I can't remember if his was 4 or maybe 3 years. Mm-hmm. But to compromise is really how you get legislation passed sometimes. And so it's really not all I want. It's, I preferred the 1 year. But the art of compromise is how you get things done. And so we will have the 2 year, and I believe that she will sign it.
Well, I guess the question I have is what happens now? Because, and again, that means that under the original passed law, that holdback provision, if you could not read proficiently as a third grader, starting this spring, you would not be promoted to fourth grade. Now, there were all kinds of programs to try to get you caught up and everything, but that was a pretty significant accountability provision. Now that will be 2024?
2024, yes.
So my question is, what happens to those 2 years of kids? If I can't read proficiently, third grade, I still get promoted. I mean, is there any help? How do we get these kids caught up?
We are trying to provide some additional pieces that would say if they are not reading on grade level, that some of the interventions that had been a part of how they were learning before, whether they were in first, second, or even in third grade, that would follow them just a little bit longer. One of the things I would like to say is that we were, and Representative Drummond, who carried Senator Smitherman's bill, talked about we're not delaying any of the implementation of the bill, only that holdback provision. And while in my perfect world it might be in 1 year, the good news is that our students are already reading at higher levels than they were before the Literacy Act. It's already having success. And so I think schools and all that have been following these students, and they know they're struggling, and they're still struggling even then, even though there's not a holdback provision in the bill yet, and there won't be next year. They know that they're struggling. And so what I hope that they will continue to encourage parents to do is to make sure their children participate in that summer school. Those are the opportunities to get them ready to be reading on third grade, on grade level reading. Mm-hmm. And so there will continue to be opportunities, and we need those families to take advantage of every one of those opportunities. These would be families that have already gotten letters saying, your child's struggling. Here are some of the issues. Here's how you can help. And so to have families helping with the reading at home, taking advantage of after school or summer school for that child to get every possible ability to close that gap so that they truly are reading on grade level.
Switching gears to the Numeracy Act.
Yes.
The Numeracy Act, it was signed by the governor into law today. She had a really lengthy statement in support of this bill, so clearly likes what y'all were doing with this. But here we go again with implementation, right? You can pass a law, but it's all about how it gets implemented. What are some of the things we should be looking for in terms of how the department can implement this bill?
I think it's such a broad bill. When we passed Literacy Act, which numeracy is kind of based on the same strategy that the Literacy Act has, well, we already had the Alabama Reading Initiative, ARI, in place. And so what we could do is take that base and just grow it. We don't have that in place on math. And so we now are going to be building that. But some of the things that I was very excited about, we have been in a school improvement small group, including senators and House members. And one of the meetings, we actually had the group that's been studying the department, PCG, anyway, they were very much bragging on the numeracy, and their comment was that this bill potentially puts Alabama at the forefront of all the states in the nation on how we're going about preparing students with foundational skills for math. And so what I'm hoping is that we'll be setting up a new department like we have ARI. This would be an Office of Math, and they'll be looking for a director. I'm hoping that now we're in the leading edge. Maybe we can recruit a director for this Office of Mathematics that would be like the Nick Saban of math, and that would come in and have a free range to make sure that all our students are well grounded in their math skills.
The Nick Saban of math.
The Nick Saban of math.
That's interesting. One more question before I let you go. There's, we're seeing these delay bills on literacy. I know that the numeracy is not the same. The accountability is really on the school district, or
Correct.
school district, or even the school.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, 2 years from now, are we going to be back in the legislature seeing legislation saying, wait, please don't change these schools. We need to give them more time. We need to take away these or delay these accountability measures.
I hope that we will not. I don't think that we will. I think one of the reasons we've had the years of COVID, and I know that put up some barriers and some challenges, but what I've seen through the data that we had, we were overcoming those. We are closing those gaps. Reading was improving, and literacy was. And so I think this year we'll continue to see that growth. And so I wanted us to wait 1 year because I wanted us to have 3 consistent years of testing, and we had not had that because of the year of COVID. Well, now we'll end up having 4, but I think we're going to see us moving in the right direction. On the Numeracy Act, the accountability for those schools, they get 3 years of intervention to continue to improve, but then they get an additional 4 years. And so the accountability piece, in my opinion, is extremely
generous.
Generous, yes, very much so. But I'm hoping that gives us time, like we needed with literacy, to build that Office of Mathematics, to get people in places, coaches in places that are helping all our teachers be successful as they teach those foundational math skills.
Representative Collins, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Glad to be with you.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
Next, I'm joined by State Senator Will Barfoot from Pike Road. Senator, thanks for coming on Capitol Journal.
Okay, glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
You had a pretty big bill in committee today, and here we're getting in the final stretch. Only a few more days to go in the legislative session, so really only a few more days left to pass legislation. So your bill in committee had to do with divisive concepts. These are, some people call it critical race theory, except by a different name, but it's stopping the teaching of concepts that make people feel marginalized or guilty or shamed in school, but also in the state government manuals. Walk me through why this bill is necessary.
Well, you're right. Let me first of all say that some people have referred to it as a critical race theory or CRT bill. It's interesting to note that the words critical race theory or CRT are not found in the bill. The bill itself has 9 divisive concepts. I think if you listen to committee today, even some of the Democratic members of the committee acknowledge that by themselves that those 9 concepts, divisive concepts that would, as you said, marginalize folks or make them feel less than, is something that we shouldn't be teaching or pushing on our kids. The other part of the bill, though, is that if you're a state entity, government entity, regardless of the state or local level, that you could not accept any federal grants or grants of any kind that had those strings attached, those in which divisive concepts were pushed, or any money from any private enterprises, third parties that may give or donate money or resources to the state if those divisive concept strings were attached. You're right. We've talked about this before. The State Board of Education did pass a resolution which does similar to what this bill is trying to do. The important difference between the two, though, is that that's a resolution. It's not binding, simply a resolution. And by enacting this law, if we were to pass it, and I'm hopeful that we will, and hopeful that the governor would sign it, I believe she would, is that we would put into the law, in effect, what the State School Board of Education has tried to do and put our own twist on that.
I see. And when it comes to, because I think everybody can agree, just as you said, your Democratic colleagues did, that you don't want any student feeling that, well, goodness, the instruction given in this course or whatever makes me feel like less than, or because of a race or sex, something I can't control, that
Sure.
I feel bad. However, federal law kind of addresses this too. The Civil Rights Act of 1964. I mean, if there is something racist or sexist or something, or especially racist, taught in schools, we have redress, don't we, through the Civil Rights Act of 1964, through the courts, I suppose.
Yeah, we do. But one of the things that I think, if you listen to some of the folks throughout the state, have said, well, we don't have this, we're not teaching this, it's not a part of the curriculum, and it's not. But it is available. I mean, currently teachers, my mother was a teacher, history teacher, as a matter of fact. Some of those teachers, by innuendo or otherwise, could be putting that into some of what's being taught in the classroom. I said this also in committee. My mother, as I said, a history teacher. It's important that we teach history. It's important that we don't gloss over it. I mean, there's lots of good to talk about in Alabama. There's lots of good that's happened throughout the United States. There's also some bad and some ugly, to kind of quote the Clint Eastwood Western. And it's important that we talk about all those. And there's a section that's specific to the bill that enumerates that, nothing in this bill is meant to indicate that we can't talk about those historical events in a factually accurate setting.
Mm-hmm. Switching gears, you have another piece of legislation that has moved its way through the Senate, through House Committee. This is dealing with the suspension of driver's license. Basically, rolling back a little bit, how the state goes about suspending driver's licenses for some of these fines and fees and court appearances that stack up. Walk me through what the changes in this bill are.
Sure. Well, let me kind of go back. So here a couple of years ago, I see it sometimes in a courtroom, and I wonder, what is the nexus between, for instance, someone not paying child support and having their license suspended? This bill doesn't address that, but that's kind of how my thought process began. And really, I mean, there should be an avenue to where we suspend licenses for someone who cannot safely control their vehicle on the roads or the highways of the state of Alabama. Currently, though, there are, if a judge, and this bill only deals with post-adjudication relief. So, if you get a ticket and you don't go to court, your license can still be suspended and a warrant can be signed for your arrest for not showing up for court. All this bill does is it relates to traffic violations for which you have either gone to court and pled guilty, or you went to court and had a trial and were found guilty. If a judge sets up a post-trial hearing, in other words, something after that trial or conviction, and if you fail to show up the first time for that review, there still can be a warrant for your arrest, but your license is not suspended or capable of being suspended unless you miss 2 or more. So we're not trying to get folks out of not showing up for court. I mean, we want people to show up for court. The second thing that it does is, if you are put on a payment plan, the only way that a license can be suspended is after a year. If you've missed 6 or more of those payments, then your license can be suspended. Keep in mind, we want people to pay their court costs and fines they've been ordered to. They've either pled guilty or found guilty by a court. We want that to be paid, but we don't think that someone should have their license suspended simply because maybe they've paid for 2 years and they miss a $25 a month payment, and now their license is suspended. So there's some teeth in it still. Possibility for an arrest warrant for not showing up. There's the possibility for being held in contempt if you don't make those payments, and your license could still be suspended. It's just you have to miss more than one court date, or conversely, you have to have gone over the past year, you have to miss 6 or more of those payments.
As I said, been through the Senate, been through House committee, having trouble getting it on the Senate calendar. Do you think it's possible with these next 3 days?
Yeah, I'm hopeful. And you're right. You know, we got it out of the Senate. We got it out of the House committee, and we're hopeful that we can get it on the floor. You know, there's been a little pushback on the bill, and we'll see if we can overcome that. I think it's the right thing to do. Obviously, you know, we don't want people that are not safe to drive on the roads out there. Again, this bill doesn't do that. We want people to show up for court, and we want them to pay their court costs and fines. This bill just gives a little grace under certain circumstances, especially in today's economy when you got businesses that are clamoring for folks to come to work. Without a license, it makes it a little bit more difficult for the businesses around the state to do that.
Mm-hmm. We'll be watching down the stretch. Senator Barfoot, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capitol Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capitol Journal and link to past episodes on Capitol Journal's Facebook page.
That's our show for tonight, except for one final thing. We want to wish a very happy birthday to our producer, John Holman, now in the control room. Many happy returns, John. Thanks for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with more coverage from the legislative session. That's 10:30 p.m. right here on APT. For our Capitol Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.